I got my buddy Craig Tann here from Huntington and Ellis. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Thanks for joining me on the Market Pulse. You and I do the same thing. We run offices and have teams that help entry-level buyers and of course all kinds of sellers sell their homes in the market. I'm excited to hear from you what you think of our current market. We were chopping it up a little bit before we turned the cameras on. Inventory's up a tad.
Yep.
Rates have maintained kind of status quo in that like high 6, 7-ish range. What are you seeing out there?
I mean, in talking to a lot of my agents, I think we're seeing a little bit of stagnant market. I mean, there's still stuff moving, but in my opinion, I think it seems like there's just a disconnect between what inventory is and what it actually feels like in the market. So in other words, we have 9,300 homes on the market, 3,200 plus under contract, and would we have 2,800 homes that sold last month? But yet it feels like a slow market. And yes, it's not as busy as our normal springs, but there is actually properties moving. But I do think there's a disconnect for sellers on pricing. And then on the buyer side, I think buyers just aren't taking advantage of what's out there.
I asked you too, before we got started, like usually in how long you been doing this?
21 years.
Me as well, same time. So when I felt the market shift the last time in 2008, it seemed like the top end of the market dropped first. It seemed like nobody would touch $1 million house. But the higher end market seems to be resilient. And I've been a tad, curious about, is the $400,000 and $500,000 range breaking down? And you and I, we talked that it seems like it depends where you're at. There are some homes you could list for $450,000 and get 4 or 5 offers. You could list one that's within the market price, and then you need to do a reduction. You agree?
Absolutely. I don't think it's not relevant to price. Like I think last month we had a little over 200 homes over $1 million that sold, which is fantastic. I really just think it's property specific. It seems like the nice ones, the special ones, like always in the market, those seem to be shifting. And your average property across all price points, they're having a little bit more of a challenging time, and now they have competition. And when you start looking at the market, and even in small segments of the area where we used to have 1 or 2 in competition, now we have 5, 6, 7, or 8. And I think it's a mix of sellers not getting to that point where they want to be realistic, and maybe even sometimes us as agents, right? We're used to this market, and some of the agents in our market have only been doing this in a upward trend market, and now we're kind of a flat market. And I think they're just, they're tough conversations to have with clients. And I think we're just not there yet where they're ready to have these tough conversations.
I love that we're bringing someone who's in the trenches and bringing this information to our members out there who might not be getting this information at their office or wherever they're working. Like, so do you tell your listing agents that are going on appointments to focus on what's sold or more on what's actually available and what the competition is? Because isn't sold in the past, and isn't that, because if this market's shading a tad towards the buyer side now, it's not really about what sold 3-4 months ago, because that's really 6 months if you think about it. It's more about like, are we the best one on the block? Is that how you kind of advise?
Absolutely. Yeah. We actually had a meeting about that yesterday, and we used to be able to look at available and say, okay, we don't have much competition. Let's push it a little bit and let's see what we can get. Then we started looking at solds and saying, well, hey, this is what they're selling for, so we got to be within reason to this number. And now it's like, let's look at what's under contract and let's find out what are those properties actually transacting for. And that gives us a true idea of what's actually happening in the market. So I think the focus is the under contracts and pricing now. Like, it doesn't make sense to take a listing that's 5, 10, 15% overpriced. You're literally wasting your time, and you're wasting the client's time.
Yeah, not even 5,000 overpriced, right? Because it's a burden on the office, all those phone calls you have to have with the seller, all that maintenance. If they're not willing to sign the contract at a price that's marketable, they're not really taking the agent's advice.
Agreed. And us as agents, we got to get more educated. We got to get more realistic ourselves on what's really, what price is going to cause that house to sell. And we got to be willing to have those tough conversations and tell them exactly what they need to hear, and not, what we call buying the business, where we tell them what they want to hear, and, hopefully we get an offer.
I keep an eye on your numbers. You and I kind of compete at that in the same space. You're lighting it up. Lots of other agents and brokers are complaining about the market. I see it as a healthy market. What would anybody actually say they would like to change? There's plenty of homes for sale. There's still buyer demand. homes are transacting. We don't have 6, 8, 10 months inventory like we had in the past. I mean, isn't it a healthy market out there?
I think so. And I think there's opportunity. I think if you're working with a buyer, don't be afraid to be aggressive. I know, listing agents, we don't love when we get lower offers, but I think right now as a listing agent, we're just happy to get an offer. So don't be afraid to get your client to write a little bit lower offer, ask for closing costs. Don't be afraid to be aggressive and take advantage. And then on the flip side, on the seller side, don't be afraid to have those tough conversations with your seller and get them to a number that's going to cause it to sell, because it is hard to keep a seller happy for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months. Realistically, you got to get them an offer within 60 days. Otherwise, it becomes very challenging to be a listing agent.
You've made my point. It's a healthy market.
Yes.
If you have a buyer, you're able to go and show several homes. There's lots of options. So if you get a stubborn seller, you just move on to the next. You're probably going to get concessions paid for your buyer, and you're going to get your fees paid. In a seller's market, you might get no to the concessions. You might get some pushback on fees. So as a buyer's agent out there shopping, perfect place to go shop, right? There's plenty to choose from, and you got reasonable sellers and sellers brokers and agents willing to, accept the offer. On the listing side, there's plenty of equity still.
Absolutely.
All these sellers have tons of equity. So final takeaway, healthy market. What do you think May will look like compared to April?
I think we have a split spring market. I think we got the first part in February. I think we all felt it. It was exciting.
Early.
And then, March and April, a little bit softer. I think May will start to pick up a little bit. And I think we'll actually feel a really good, strong market in June. But
So it's kind of a delayed spring.
Delayed spring, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm telling my agents, if you're planning a cruise, push it out till August, because I think, May, June, and even part of July might be busy for us. You agree?
Agreed, 100%.
Craig, I appreciate you coming over, bud.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.